Welcome to another episode of our Indie Dev Showcase here on the channel, where each week we spotlight many of the indie games that we play on our Wednesday night streams. If you'd like to submit a game for a future piece, please get in touch. All the games shown are either press key submissions, demos, or games that are in my back catalog. And we are beginning with The Wind and Wilted Blossom. And this is an FTL kind of style game, but replacing spaceships with Japanese samurai and warriors fighting Oni and other strange monsters. So the structure of this one is that we are making a pilgrimage across Japan with our goal to destroy, I believe it was an evil demon witch who has cursed the land. And we are being chased by that curse, as you can see on the map. So the structure of the game is kind of similar to FTL and other kind of roguelike style games. You must explore through various points of interest, trying to stay one step ahead of the doom that's following you. Different points will have events such as towns that you can restock, enemies, quests, and so on and so forth. Now, your actual characters themselves are going to be these individual, basically the people that you find, and they belong to different classes that affect what skills they have access to, their weapons, and how they'll upgrade as you unlock more throughout the game. And this is a major point about playing this, as your starting characters will not be able to do a whole lot. The dynamic is that every character or every human has health and armor. As long as you have armor after a fight is done, you will suffer no permanent damage. If you take any health damage, however, that will persist until you spend resources to recover from it. So a major point about this game is positioning your characters so that those with armor will always take the brunt of the attacks, while those who have less armor or those who've lost their armor will just be able to go in to do damage and then get out. Now, the art of the game definitely is going for kind of like Japanese scroll work, and it looks nice, but the problem is that there isn't really a lot of animation in this game. You can see just like the fire and the wind there, but our characters are very stilted. And I think part of that is by design, but it definitely lacks that level of fidelity that we will see from other action-style games or roguelites, however you want to describe it. And The Wind and Wilted Blossom is definitely on the roguelike side. It follows through with FTL's style of persistence, that as you play through you unlock more weapons, starting characters, new classes that can appear in future runs, but you will not have persistence across said runs. And the problem that the game has is that it's trying to be very strategic, very tactical in terms of the combat, but it doesn't quite work. Because at the end of the day, numbers matter over tactics. See, they want you to kind of like try and go in, attack, and either use another character to taunt or move out of the enemy's range. But when you start fighting heavier enemies, those who can just wreck your armor and they have enough movement to do it, there really isn't anything that you can do to get around it. Now, of course, you can spend more time on the map getting more upgrades, getting more characters, and it turns into that situation where you're either going to keep winning or you're just going to lose outright. And that is very much in line with FTL's style, where if you keep getting the good upgrades, keep keeping your characters alive, the game becomes quite easy, or easier. But it can be frustrating to play a game like this, where one wrong battle, one thing that you did wrong, and your entire run is over. And I just don't think this game has the same legs and replayability that we've seen from other examples. If you are a fan of Japanese mythology and this style, I would say give this one a check and see if you can make something out of it. But if a game like FTL or a lot of the other roguelikes that we've seen didn't work for you, then I don't think The Wind and Wilting Blossom is going to convince you otherwise to play this kind of game. For our next title, we have Jets and Guns 2. This game came out of early access, I believe, in 2020 or maybe late 2019, and just goes to show us how many games we're playing here that we finally are getting to it. But this is the sequel to the cult classic kind of shmup RPG kind of design, where the story is that there are bad guys in the universe, you have a ship, go out and blast them all to little bits. So the general gameplay loop, again, is going to be these mix of these two elements. In the missions themselves, you're going to use your ship to deal with all these enemies, and the encounters themselves are fixed maps, which is kind of a shame that there isn't a little bit more variance in terms of what can happen during a single play. After a level, you take your accumulated money and all that good stuff, and you'll use it to buy new parts of your ship, including new weapons, new kind of passive attachments, and you can upgrade your various weapons and attach elements to them, such as reducing their cooldown, giving more damage, etc., etc. So the gameplay loop itself is very much go on a mission, get the loot you need to become stronger, blow up more stuff. And the game's ever increasingly elaborate, crazy boss fights certainly do work along those lines. Now, this game is far less, I think, punishing in the beginning compared to the first Jets and Guns, where you can lose a lot of money and time just by picking the wrong upgrades or not investing in the right areas. With that said, my main issue with this game is that I feel like it didn't go far enough. There are New Game Plus and difficulty options that add more elements, but they're not changing the maps. You're still doing the same levels in the same order, and while they are very bright, colorful, very striking graphics, it doesn't really change moment to moment. And it is such a shame that we didn't get to see more of, really letting loose on the RPG side, letting you do a lot more on the shmup and shooter aspects. If you're a fan of the first game or of shmups in general, definitely give this one a check. But if you're looking for something with a little bit more meat to it, I would suggest playing the first game first, and then seeing if you want to go for this one after. Now we turn to Leap of Fate. This is a game that I got from one of the mini bundles a while ago, and I've been looking for an excuse to talk more about in a video. So this is described as a cyberpunk roguelite, and it's very much a twin-stick shooter style gameplay, but with some really great aspects in some of its rogueliteness. So the story is that we play as various individuals who have been brought into a mysterious entity who promises to kind of fix their lives and give them what they're looking for if they can survive these trials. And the trials take in the form of, essentially, roguelite dungeons. So the game itself kind of mixes almost like the Slay the Spire point of interest or node-based design with almost like the dungeon crawling of a Binding of Isaac or other action roguelike games. So each quote-unquote floor is essentially made up of those cards, as you just saw. Each card represents a point of interest, be it a dungeon, shop, a lead encounter, you name it. You need to find your way to the boss fight and activate that card in order to then move on to the next floor. Each floor adds in increasingly more challenges, and you're going to have to, of course, level up and improve your character to do so. Now, to the game's credit, despite the basic kind of twin-stick design of the core gameplay of the moment-to-moment, each character does play differently. They get access to different normals and specials, and they will also get different upgrades. And this comes in the form of kind of a very large skill tree. And the skill tree itself comes in the form of these different areas. And you'll have to spend unlocks. In some cases, characters may take health in order to get upgraded, which in turn will affect their base properties or give them new ways of their attacks working, such as, multi-strike, chain lightning, etc., etc. Besides your basic abilities, you can also find spells, which also come in different upgrades that enhance their properties and their damages, which you can also add to your character. So, the game itself has a very effective hook in terms of this moment to moment. Now, persistence and where the rogueliteness comes in, that after you win or lose a run, by completing specific objectives during said run, you will unlock permanent bonuses on a per character basis, and these bonuses will usually relate to that character in some way, such as making one character's dash maybe it will have slightly faster cooldown, maybe their attack will do more damage or have an additional property, and if you keep doing these, you'll also unlock harder variants of the game for said characters. So while the game may not have, I think, the aesthetics of some of the other action roguelikes and lights that we've become accustomed to, the underlying systems of Leap of Fate I feel are very well done. And if you are a fan of any of the action rogues that we've seen over the last 5-6 years, I would say definitely give this one a check, and you may be surprised with what you find. As I said, I think the main limitation of this game, well, actually there are two. The variance in between the runs is not as strong as we see from more modern examples. Once you've got a game plan kind of figured out for a character, you can pretty much run for that strategy on each other run. And again, with the persistent elements, expert players will eventually just be able to wipe the floor with everything that's in the game. And then the aesthetics of the game, the game kind of looks like an older kind of, I think, aesthetic too. It's going for like this kind of like 90s, like, I don't want to say grunge, but like that 90s gritty kind of look to it. You can even hear like the guitar riffs every time we unlock something in the game. So while it may not be the strongest example of an action roguelite, I say that this one is definitely one to check out, and especially take notes of how it streamlines a lot of the underlying elements and really lets somebody kind of play this game at a very fast pace. And with that, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we have 3 more games to look at for this week's Spotlight. And as always, if you're interested in my books on design, then be sure to check the following out. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with horror coming by the end of 2021. Up now, we have Monster Sanctuary. This is a game that we played a little bit of it during the kind of the early access, or kind of a pre-version, and then we played more of it on stream. And this is one of those concepts that I really enjoyed, but ultimately I just kind of fell out of love with it. But the general concept here is, what if we combine Metroidvania with Pokemon? And what we have is a 2D side-scroller, where your various monsters that you collect essentially define your abilities. You can have one monster out on the field at any one time, and that monster's quote-unquote effect can be used for moving around, finding new secrets, etc., etc. Now, you also do find other upgrades that are permanently attached to your character, but the majority of the game is going to be this loop of exploration, get new characters, or get new parts, which then let you access more areas. Now, the actual combat is done 3-on-3 style, with a heavy emphasis on elements. As you can see on screen, I have a total of 6 in my quote-unquote pool that I can mix and match for each fight. Hitting enemies in their weaknesses will do more damage, hitting them in their strengths will barely touch them, as we all know. Now, part of the challenge of the game is creating parties that synergize together. This involves, making sure elements can work or play off of each other, or having characters who can support buffs, heals, and the like. Now, the progression of your characters is really quite interesting. As you play through, you'll unlock, or you'll be able to access their skill tree, and the skill tree will hit different aspects, such as having one path for elemental effects, one for buffing, one for general attacking. And then there are special passives that will change or affect the dynamics of how these skills work. such as you'll be able to get things that can do more debuffs, attacks that can gain more damage if you hit an enemy with the corresponding effect, and there's a lot of depth to how you raise and cultivate your characters that I like. Now, the problem with the game is that this is one of those titles that it's easy until it's not. And that comes in about, I would say, maybe like the halfway point, when you start running into kind of the quote-unquote bosses. And I'm not talking about the Guardian monsters, which are kind of like the enhanced elite fights that you have. But when you start fighting fellow monster characters or monster collectors, and what ends up happening is that you get into these kinds of 3-on-3 fights where each party can kind of swap in and out. And these enemies in these battles are normally going to be scaled to around your level. And fighting against an enemy party that is kind of like fully built to synergize against you can be very frustrating. And this is one of those games that there isn't much that you can do if you get stuck. You see, the monsters that you collect are locked to specific biomes. So if, let's say, you really need somebody who is resistant to fire, well, you better hope that you have somebody available in your party or you know where one is. And the game itself, again, is Metroidvania paced. So the world is quote-unquote open, but it's not as open as you would think, as you're going to be locked based on upgrades and what monsters you can find. And it got to the point where we got stuck. I think this was in kind of like the Sun Temple or the Sun Biome, that I just didn't see a way forward without spending a lot of time grinding and maybe even just completely respecking my monsters. Now, there are advanced elements, including evolving monsters, adding items that will improve their stats, and again, there is certainly a lot here, but this is very much an example of one of those games where what you do in the first hour is exactly what I'm going to be doing in the 10th hour and the 20th hour and so on. Now, with that said, while I did eventually bounce off of it, I really like the concept of it. And if you are a fan of Metroidvanias and Pokemon and turn-based design, I would definitely give this one a shot and see what you can think or what you think of it. And I'm curious, for those of you who did play this further than me, does the game unlock any other systems and elements to it? Because we stopped just about when we unlocked the evolution mechanic, and I'm just wondering if there's more to it than that. As we move on, we now go to Arcanium. And this was a game that we played in early access quite a long time ago, and what you see will most definitely not represent the current version of it, as when we played this there was no save functionality built in, and I know that was added in about like a week or two after its early access release. But this is a game that tries to combine kind of open world or exploration with roguelike nature of replayability, and of course everybody's favorite other genre, deck building. So the flow of the game is that you have to explore this map to complete the various quests. That was that kind of thing that was highlighted in the bottom of the screen with the green flash of it. Complete each quest will unlock the major boss of the area. Beat the boss and you survive the quest itself. Now, the game itself looks very similar, or at least in terms of kind of like the like tiles or tokens on the field, to something like Hearthstone. But the combat itself reminds me a little bit of like the lane-based nature of, I think it was the Elder Scrolls deck builder. So each character, and you choose your party of 3 at the beginning of the game, is a unique class onto themselves. They'll have their own cards, their own artifacts or equipment that you can put onto them, and you get the picture. Now in combat, you essentially share your mana between the various people, and you're able to attack or do whatever as long as you have mana to spare. The challenge of this game is that your goal isn't to completely kill one enemy, but each map or each fight requires you to kill X amount of enemies, and when you kill one, that enemy will respawn. So this prevents you from getting into, 2-on-3, 3 versus 1 situations. It reminds me a little bit of a Vault of the Void in that respect, that it's more about you completing an objective as opposed to just fighting the individual enemies. Now, of course, the challenge of the game is that you're able to move characters around on the board. This allows you to set up so that your tank will take the brunt of the major attacks, get your spellcasters out of the way, you get the picture. And as you play through, the challenge will become not only figuring out synergies, but how to keep your less health dependent or your weaker characters alive. Because the thing about this game is that if any one of your 3 party members runs out of health in combat, that is a game over. And that does add a little bit more to the prospects compared to some of the other games that we've played. Now, from what we played of this game on stream, I do like the systems at work here. The interplay of the map and exploration. As you play through on the field, different tiles will start to become quote-unquote corrupted, and performing battles in them will be far more dangerous. Bosses have their own unique rules to them, and the game is set up for long-term persistence in terms of unlocking new characters, new things can be for each character, and so on and so forth. In terms of complaints, it is, from what we played of the game on stream, I think a little too early to get too far into the nitty gritty in terms of the design of it. Like I said, when we first played this game, there wasn't even a save feature to it. And since then, according to their roadmap, they've added in new heroes, new maps, a new difficulty mode, and there's even more coming to the game. So there is certainly a lot here, and I enjoyed this one. My main concern about this is kind of more from the market side of things. As I'm sure all of you are aware of, deck building roguelikes have certainly become very big among indie developers over the last 2 to 3 years. And I don't know if Arcanium, either in this version or at 1.0, is going to differentiate itself enough when we look at everything from Monster Train, Slay the Spire, Roguebook, and etc, etc. But I still enjoyed this one. I'm tempted to jump back into and see where the game is at now by the fact that we can actually save it and so on. So if you are not completely sick and tired of deck builders and roguelikes, I would say give this one a check and see if the systems work for you. For our final game of the night, this is Nova Islands. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the footage that you're seeing, this is from the itch.io demo that was sent to me about, I think 6 months to a year ago, possibly. And since then, the game has an official store page on Steam and will be released over there, and you'll find a link to that along with all the other games shown tonight down below in the description. So, this game's concept is definitely going for more of a pixel art driven Factorio. So focus on logistics, automation, all that other good stuff. Now, where the game differs from that, and of course something like Dyson Sphere Program, is that instead of going either from multiple planets or just having one giant biome, this game is focused on island exploration. Every island will have different resources, different things for you to gather, and part of the challenge of this one is in terms of the automation, that you're going to set up bots, and the bots themselves are going to define essentially your automation process. So you construct a bot, you assign it to a specific charging station, you give it commands, and the bot will do that as long as it can provide those commands or the conditions are there. So as with games like Factorio and Dyson Sphere, the beginning of this game is very slow, and I would say this one may be even the slowest one compared to the other games that we've played. But the idea, of course, is that you'll eventually be able to set up the automation, you'll be able to do all this stuff on your own, which you can then focus on bigger and more important things, like fighting enemies, upgrades, so on and so forth. Now, the other major point about this game is that your main limitation is that you have to construct or you need oxygen to breathe. Oxygen is unfortunately not included here. Plenty of water is, of course. And it is, again, one of those like early game constraints that's going to seem very annoying, very bad, which ideally as you play through, you'll be able to get around that. Now, as an interesting point in terms of the progression in Nova Islands, is that the island will, or the islands themselves will generate resources, and the resource nodes that it will generate are going to be dependent on what researches and unlocks you have. The tech tree reminds me a little bit of a forager, in that you pick a kind of direction to go in the tree, and you unlock more stuff related to it. But of course, you want to get as many different nodes as possible, so you have the full trick or the full assembly. So I enjoyed this game. I know this one wasn't all people's favorites when we played it on stream, I think, due to the limitations of it. At the moment when we played this one, it really didn't do, I think, enough to differentiate itself from some of the other examples. And if you are already a hardcore Factorio fan, at least in the version that we played, I don't think there's enough there. Now again, keep in mind that was a long time ago, and I'm sure the game has been updated since then. But I would definitely put this probably, like, if I were to, grade it compared to Factorio and Dyson Sphere, I would say at the moment it would probably be third place. But third place among, some really fantastic examples is still not bad. And I'm genuinely curious to see where the game is going to go in terms of its mechanics. The store page hints at fighting giant bosses and kind of go maybe like even like a monster hunter kind of route, which unfortunately we did not get to see that in this play. But again, if you are a fan of automation and this kind of min-max design, then I would say give this one at least a try and see if it piques your interest. So with that, we're going to wrap up this week's Indie Showcase. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you'd like to submit a game for a future video and stream, please get in touch. We do these streams every Wednesday night. And like I said, if you want to follow these games, you'll find them in the description, along with Twitter, Discord, Patreon, all that other great stuff. Do the liking and subscribing people keep telling you to do, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.